What I'd like to do now, and first of all, thank you, gentlemen, for all of your time and effort and the presentations. And it's obvious that you put a lot of effort into explaining to us the complexity of your missions. So really, it is very much appreciated. I would like to take questions from the floor, and start with Efrat, please. All right, I think maybe we'll answer and then take the next question.
I'll take the money. You take the measure of the translators and the cultural exchange. Well, the money. Let's start with the money. It's very, very challenging for us. The microphone. Sorry. To coordinate various missions and various mandates. We do. On Thursday, we will be again together, this time not on public, but privately, in order to coordinate our operations in the region. But take something that is very critical and very fragile, Sheba Farms. Sheba Farms, sorry. Sheba Farms is covered by UNDOF as OGGT patrolling it, and is part of a lot of actions that are triggered from UNIFIL area of operation. So you can see how the area is a part of the three. We have a new mission in Syria right now coming up. Often, when I think of the mandate, I go back to Ansel, and I would like, what I would have preferred, to have sort of the region under an umbrella or a single vision that would allow us to have a more proactive approach, and a vision that sometimes is, we were using Italian example, is what in soccer is contropiede, is really reacting when you have an offensive towards you. I think that the UN in the Middle East has been so overwhelmed by events that would be ideal if the international community, and notice it, I'm not talking about the UN, I'm talking of the international community, would find the energy and the vision to revert the situation and have a project for the future, express it in a mandate.
The Tower of Babel question, the Tower of Babylon question, on the intercultural complexity, the multilingual, how do you get everybody? How do you get everybody on the same mission statement with people coming from so many different countries and so many different backgrounds?
Does this work?
Oh, it is. It's on.
Actually, there are two layers in here. I think the first layer is how do we cope with this issue inside our organization. And as it was mentioned, language is, of course, the key element here. But how can we overcome that? It means that we need to explain more things to people, and we need to explain more and over and again what we mean by saying like this, and what is the meaning of this organization. So it takes more effort within the organization. And if you want to precise, then you need to give everything in writing, because then people have enough time to read and translate if they don't understand the talk. Then the other layer is how do we interact with the local population, and I think this is a key issue. First of all, you need to understand where you operate. You cannot solve the problem if you don't understand the problem. That is the first thing. You need to understand where you operate, where you work. And one element in our peacekeepers training is cultural awareness. You need to understand things about religion, language, local way of thinking. Those are fundamental issues for peacekeepers. And the biggest mistake to do is to go somewhere not understanding where you are and then breaking all the local rules and regulations of human behavior.
Another question, please. Can you say who you are, which program your name?
My name is Raphael. I'm from Switzerland, studying the Conflict Resolution and Mediation program. And I would like to address a question to Major Colin and Whiteman from the Multinational Force of Observers. How's the security situation regarding, especially the North Camp? I mean, Gaza is very close. There are several missiles flying in the direction more of Israel, I suppose. Has it ever happened that missiles fly to your direction as well? I mean, not more the North Camp, I guess, than the South Camp.
It's a very good question, and it depends who you talk to, whether it happened or not. Yes, we've had a missile that was they were basically in the Gaza Strip. They were using the Sinai as a little test bed for seeing how far the missile would go. You could hear it going over the camp, but we've only had one incident. It is a huge concern, but it's also a huge concern for the Egyptians because as the host nation, they are responsible for our security. So we do work very, very closely to them, and I think they are recognising that since there has been the fundamental change in security in the North Sinai, really once you get past El Arish, there are no police, going quite a long way south. But this is where the agreed activities mechanism comes in, where the Egyptians, through us, will ask the Israelis if they can have exceptions to the treaty to deploy soldiers in security positions. It happened through the election. Once the parliamentary elections were over, those soldiers were withdrawn. Initially, when Mubarak was in hospital down in Sharm el-Sheikh, they had tanks that could go into supposedly Zone C. They didn't. They had them ready to go in if there was a problem, because it doesn't do the tourist industry any good. But for me and the Director General, that's a huge concern of us, because we have a responsibility to the states that are contributing soldiers to look after their people and provide a secure environment. So, you know, we are investing actually quite a lot of money in the physical security of our remote sites in North Camp, whereas the fence used to probably just be a psychological barrier. It no longer is that psychological barrier. You have to have a proper fence that meets all the requirements with lightings, towers, sensors. People will come in now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, please. Who are you addressing this question to?
Oh, that was just, so the first one is the MFO related, and then the latter question is whoever has any thoughts about it.
basically, once again, people smuggling, that's a host nation responsibility. That's a policing function. Obviously, if we see anything, that is reported to the police. That's why we do mobile patrols. We have OPs out so that we keep situational awareness. But one of the things that we have to be careful of is, and I know this might sound like a bit of a cop-out, we're there at the invitation of the two nations. If we become involved in local activities against the Bedouin, they can make our mission impossible to carry out. And I think, you know, maintaining that separation, and I just take that other bit, and building that confidence, if we can at least keep Egyptians and Israelis talking, and it's working really well with the military because it's not working anywhere else, it's keeping at least a link between the two countries open. And I think that's fundamental for us in the MFO, is keeping those links open.
Let me try to answer your second question, which is quite interesting and has been a source of debate, not only in the UN, but in the international community for many years. The questions has a third aspect, which are, who are the clients? You know, who is interested in the problem solving? Because often we are addressing the questions only to the parties. There is a third element, which is the international community, and there is so much the international community is ready or willing to invest in order to change a status quo. I'll be more explicit, and I will take it as external, taking the example of UNDOF. I consider UNDOF one of the most successful operations that the UN ever had. With these numbers, to keep basically a situation stable on the Syrian-Israeli front for so many years has been a great success. So, on one hand, you have a failure according to the doctrine, because the mission didn't reach the point of being superfluous and close and say, result achieved. On the other, there was always the international community with the chance, if the international community was not satisfied, to say this mission is useless, let's close it. They never did it. So the cost effectiveness of the mission is one element that the international community is taking into consideration every time they go for the extension of the mission, for a renewal of the mandate, for a reshaping of the mission. It's not up to the mission, it's up to the Security Council and ultimately to the international community. But this is where you have this thermometer of success. And ultimately, it's not the mission to decide, achieved, not achieved, we leave, but is the international community that think that the mission is still a very important one. Related, for instance, to UNIFIL, I think that compared to the number of incidents and threats that the mission is facing today in the area of operation, the mission is by and large successful and could be looked at a phase out. If you put that in a regional context, you realize how it's important to keep a strong element of stability in one of the most fragile elements of the region. And this is, you know, how you measure the situation, the presence, and ultimately the cost in a different way.
Nico, you wanted to ask something? Identify which program you're with also.
I'm from Conflict Resolution and Mediation. My name is Nico, I'm from Chile. I have two questions. The first question is for the Major General of the Philippines. I do not speak Filipino, so.
No problem.
And the question is, I noticed that in your presentation you talk about the occupied Golan, at least part of Golan was Israel. My question is that, is there like formal understanding of your organization that is occupied land? And if the answer is yes, if there is a formal claim from your organization to Israel to give the land back. So that's the first question. And the second question is to Mr. Francesco. I I had no idea that there was like a buffer zone between Israel and Lebanon, which was like under international forces control.
No,
Well, that's not the representation.
it was not a buffer zone.
That was yesterday's presentation.
No, but my question is, for example, last year when we have like again rockets fired from Lebanon, so just specifically, how could we take responsibility for that?
Regarding your first question, as far as the UN is concerned, it's the Golan occupied by Israel is the Israeli occupied Golan.
Yes, it's as simple as that. One measure that the European Union took, for instance, is to refuse import of wine produced on the Golan unless it's labeled produced in Israel, because the product produced in Israel have in Europe the benefit of best imported country, so they are the lowest level of taxation. Since this is considered occupied Golan, this has been one of the measures for which they say, sorry, we cannot import Golani wine. So it's crystal clear on that. And the claim is not by the UN. The UN, this is very, very important in the sense that there is an element of the question that is not correct. It's not the UN that claims, is the international community through the UN. Okay, you know, the UN is the tool of the international community. And for the second question about the buffer, sorry I was probably not clear. It's not the buffer. I mean, you know, that part south of the blue line is not always south. Sometimes it's east or west most of the time. But it is still on the Israeli part of the blue line. However, the technical fence is built even further south. So there is a kind of misunderstanding between the technical fence, which is built completely on Israeli side, and that portion that could be perceived as Lebanese, but is actually south of the blue line. But it's not a buffer zone, definitely. And I apologize for not being clear enough.
Yeah, please. Which program also that we're interested?
Your first question regarding informing the populace about our missions. As far as WODOF is concerned, I believe that because we are having more and more people, the term I use is we have to engage the people, and we have to make them own the peace. That's what we have been doing, engaging the local governments and the civilian populace with some programs which will inform them about our mandate. The second thing about self-defense, we have what is called the rules of engagement. And so that you will all know, for 37 years, actually, UNDOF did not have rules of engagement. We just insisted on this based on what happened in Nakba and Naksa. And in the rules of engagement, it is specified what the actions of each UN peacekeeper must do in the event that his life is threatened or any of the facilities of the UN are threatened. And this does not take days for a decision to be made. It is situation dependent. If the life of the peacekeeper is in danger, then he has every right to defend himself, but in a graduated manner, meaning he just doesn't shoot. He first warns, and then it all depends on the rules of engagement. But more often than not, he warns them in a verbal manner. He cocks, if nothing happens, he cocks his weapon. Nothing happens, he shoots in the air. Nothing happens, shoots in the direction, etc., until finally he has to defend himself. There are rules of engagement which must be followed, which have to be followed. Although in some instances, like you said, these are not followed. But generally, there are rules of engagement which are to be followed.
I totally agree with what Natello said. We have the additional problem, you can only do with your local population what your host nation will allow you to do. The way we get around that is in the Sinai, we're the second largest employer of Bedouin after the Egyptian government. That's the best way of getting the message out. And it's also a way of them having an economic interest in us. They get really upset when there's a blockade and they can't get to work because they're not getting paid. We're also lucky too, because with the Fijians, we've had them multiple rotations. You'll find some Fijians that have had 9 one-year tours in the Sinai. And whilst things have changed, they've kept their links. Whilst they're not supposed to, what you don't know about, and you can tell people that they're not supposed to talk to locals, they will. That's one way of getting the message out. The rules of the engagement one of the difficulties too is each nation, whilst we have sort of a standard rule of engagement, different nations have different requirements. The Australians and the New Zealanders have slightly different rules of engagement, as does the United States. We have to fire a warning shot before deadly force is used. You don't have to get permission. It's all you have to be able to do. I felt that my life was threatened, but it's using, exactly as Natello said, the minimum force possible. Just because someone's got a weapon doesn't mean that is a threat. If he points it at you and it's got a magazine on and he cocks it, that means the next move is he's probably going to fire. So you use the minimum force you can. And that example I was using where they were going to overrun that remote site, when those 4 people went in, theoretically, according to the rules, deadly force could have been utilised. The site commander used total restraint and applied the rule of minimum force required rather than, well, I'm allowed to shoot them, I'll shoot them. Because if we shoot someone, our mission is in serious trouble. But at the same time, you've got to give people the right to protect themselves. But your people run out, don't they? Yeah.
So I was reminded I didn't answer one of the questions, which was about the rockets launched from the area of operation of UNIFIL. To which extent UNIFIL feels responsible about that. And of course, we are not proud of an incident that occur. Nothing of these incidents are in the right direction. We condemn them and we work in order to prevent this incident to reoccur. Having said that, we are not in the business of launching rockets, so we don't take the blame for the event, but we look at the measures to prevent the reoccurrence of such events, and particularly to prevent an escalation that could lead to reoccurrence of hostility. This is the major part. What is positive, and this is really a success, is that the parties whenever we have very serious incidents, El Aladese, the crisis on the Sheba construction the other time, are ready and willing to come to a tripartite meetings in matter of hours. And this is the way we address, not the solution, because the rockets has been already launched, so you have not the capacity to go back, but you stop the incidents where it is, and this is very important. And this can save lives, really. The other element is about the proliferation of UN agencies. This is in line of my answer to the question about the change in the mandate. Of course, the more we are reactive rather than proactive in dealing with an issue, the more the organization is weak. So as a UN civil servant, I would prefer to have an organization with a vision, with a plan, and with the capacity of enforcing it. We are very successful when the area of operation we have is limited, and this is why, in the case of OGL or in the case of UNIFIL, the mandate is clear, the area is limited, we are very operational. Has been, in a sense, one of the major challenges of ANSO, because it's left with few resources and a huge area of operation and big problems. And this is in theory, even what is happening now in Syria could be under the umbrella of ANSO. I mean, this is quite unfair. So this is where the UN, and not only, but the international community should learn on how to use the UN better. This has been a lessons learned of the 90s. One of the things that Kofi Annan brought to the Security Council was one single thing, at least the capacity to say no to request of the UN to perform Mission Impossible in terms that were such a disproportion between resources and tasks that at least as the organization responsible to deploy the people, you could say, no, these are not the conditions for us to deploy there. Having said that, this is not the solution.
I think we've taken enough questions, and I would like to, sorry. I'm sorry. You must forgive me. But it is getting late a little bit, and we would like to thank our presenters and ask Professor Nachmias for her concluding remarks. So please, Professor, if you would like to.
Again, I want to thank all the participants. I thought I knew everything about the United Nations, and I was sure that I knew everything about peacekeeping, and I realized that I learned a lot, and there's still a lot that I do not know about the United Nations and peacekeeping. I just want to mention that peacekeeping operations in the Middle East are considered a success story in the history and the peacekeeping operations around the world, and it is learned, the experience of the peacekeeping operations here in our region is studied by peacekeeping operations all over the world before and during their commitment and deployment. I personally think that peacekeeping operations, although you measure success by the termination of the operation, and none of the operations has ever been terminated except for UNIF 1 and UNIF 2, but I still think that it is very important, it is successful, and if we do not have peace, at least it's the best thing other than peace. Thank you very, very much for your efforts, for your presentations, for coming here, for honoring us with your experience and your knowledge, and from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much.